Hey, what's up? It's Todd, and welcome back to the Toddcast. In this episode, we are going to talk about RetroPie, a new Linux distribution, and the M5Stack, so stick around. Alright, welcome back to the Toddcast. This is episode 2. And in this episode, we're going to talk about a few things I've been up to lately. The first of which is RetroPie. So about a week ago, my son came to me, and he's really been getting into what he calls vintage video games lately. So games like Sonic the Hedgehog and things like that. It's really something that he's become interested in lately. And so he came to me and asked me if he could save up his money and buy a Sega Genesis. I got to thinking a little bit and I said, you know what, I think we could do one better than that. I think we could build a RetroPie. Basically, if you're not familiar with what RetroPie is, it is a Raspberry Pi based emulator that can run essentially pretty much any video game from Atari up to PlayStation 2, I believe, might be the most recent, with everything in between. I mean, GameCube, Nintendo 64, ColecoVision, you name it, and RetroPie can run it. And it's a really, really cool system that you could build out of a Raspberry Pi. And it's been around for quite some time. Honestly, I don't have much to share with you here in the Toddcast about RetroPie. There are tons and tons and tons of tutorials online that will help you out, and there's really nothing that I can add that would make them any better or any different. But I will say to you that the process was pretty painless, with the exception of one thing to note. And I should put a link down in the description of this video. It is kind of tricky to get it running on a Raspberry Pi 4. I decided to go with a Raspberry Pi 4 because of having 4 gigs of RAM compared to the Pi 3 with its 1 gig of RAM. I went and got a new Raspberry Pi 4 starter kit, and I want to show you that real quick here. So let's take a look at the Raspberry Pi 4 starter kit that I picked up. This one was the Labist starter kit for Raspberry Pi 4, and this again is the Raspberry Pi 4 Model B with 4 gigs of RAM. Now, the Labist kit is not bad. I did pick it up on a pretty good lightning deal on Amazon for around $85. Comparing this to the Vilros starter kit that I reviewed in the first version of the Toddcast, I would have to say that I would probably give a slight edge to the Vilros kit. Nothing against the Labist's kit, but I just felt that the Vilros case was a little more solid. If you watched the first edition of the Toddcast, you can probably remember that I was pretty impressed with the case of the Vilros kit. The aluminum case was just solid, well built, and just really felt like a nice solid case. The Labist kit, the case that came with the Labist kit, not terrible, just give the slight edge to Vilros. It has gone back up to around $115 for the Labist kit. I don't know if that's the permanent price for it, but it's kind of expensive for what you get. It's your standard starter kit for Pi. It comes with a power supply, with an inline switch. Like this one did come with a memory card, and the Vilros did not come with a memory card. And the other nice thing that this one came with is this little guy here, which is essentially just a SD card reader with USB-C. So nice little adapter that came with this kit. Also came with 2 micro HDMI cables, and I believe that is it. And the Raspberry Pi itself, obviously. Not a bad kit. Not my favorite, and especially if it's back up to $115, I think I would stick with the Vilros. But anyways, nevertheless, there is one catch installing RetroPie on the Raspberry Pi 4, and that is that it's not really officially supported as of yet. If you're going to build RetroPie for Raspberry Pi 4, you're going to want to get a test build, and I will post a link to where you could get that down below. Also, the Pi 4 video drivers are not yet optimized for 4K displays. So if you are going to use the Raspberry Pi 4 for RetroPie, you need to make sure you're using HDMI 0, and that is the micro HDMI port next to the USB-C power port. So I don't have the Pi 4 handy with me right now, it's actually downstairs, but you do want to make sure you pick the HDMI port next to the USB-C power port. You'll also need to edit your config.txt in the root of your SD card, and make sure you add a specific configuration variable to force it to be 1080p. And again, I will post links in the description down below for you to check that out. Alright, moving on. Alright, so moving on to the next topic. I was reading this article yesterday on techradar.com about the best Linux distros of 2020 for beginners and advanced users. Just kind of stumbled across this article in my news feed, and immediately the first thing that jumped off the page to me was this link to Elementary OS. I had seen Elementary in the past and just never really got quite around to checking it out. But I decided yesterday, since I was off for the holiday, that I would jump in and take a look at Elementary OS. I went over to elementary.io and I scrolled around a little bit and checked it out. And essentially, as you can see here, Elementary OS is a Linux distribution, but it's really, really beautiful, styled to kind of look in that Mac OS kind of flavor. If you've used Mac OS quite a bit, you'd really probably have an easy time transitioning to using Linux as a full-time operating system if you went with Elementary OS. They have this app center that's basically this graphical way to download and install programs, as opposed to, using something like apt-get or yum from the command line. And it's just a really nice looking operating system. It doesn't come with a ton of programs out of the box. It does have a music program, the Epiphany browser, Geary, I think, is the mail client. It has a photo viewer, a video viewer, calendar, and your basic terminal, and just a few other programs out of the box. But that's okay with me. I've never been a fan of operating systems bundling a whole bunch of software, most of which I probably won't use. I would rather customize and install things myself after I've installed the operating system. So like I said, I fired that up onto a USB stick. I plugged it into my Huawei MateBook, and I launched it from the USB stick and played around with it a little bit. Honestly, I liked it. It wasn't, really was easy to get around, easy to find everything. For someone who's been using Linux for several years, there was really nothing about it that I could have any complaints about, to be honest with you. Obviously, I didn't really do a full-blown install and do a full day of work on the machine, on the operating system, but I have to say it was nice. I mean, if you're looking to get into Linux and find an operating system that may be a little more comfortable, have a little lower barrier to entry, I really suggest that you check out Elementary OS. You really certainly can't go wrong giving it a try, so give it a shot. Alright, moving on. The last thing I want to talk about in today's Toddcast is the M5Stack. Now, these are these little development boards. I've picked these up months ago, and I've really yet to play around with it, but I'm finally getting in the mood to break these out and start taking a look at what they can do. So what is an ESP32? ESP32 is a system-on-a-chip microcontroller. So the nice thing about ESP32 is that it does include Wi-Fi and Bluetooth out of the box. So what is the M5Stack? Essentially, the M5Stack are these little microcontroller boards based on the ESP32 system on a chip, and the M5Stack is this really kind of cool modular based system that has the ESP board inside and these built-in OLED displays. You can also extend these boards via the GPIO pins that are available to you, and you can also stack these boards with these pluggable kind of hats that are available to purchase. This is the M5Stack basic ESP32 board, and this little guy here is the M5 stick. So as you can see, much smaller and a much tinier OLED display, but you have this kind of nice little JST connector as well as your USB-C for power. Your M5Stack down here has an SD card access. Where's the power for this guy? So you have your power over here and your JST connector and your power button on off. So the cool thing is you can pick up these little sensors that are kind of pre-configured with these JST connectors, right? You have a GPS sensor and it comes with this nice little handy JST connector that you can use to connect that up to your device. So I want to take a look at these little guys and see really just what it takes to connect up to them, get a quick program running on them really quick and easy. So let's do that. So to get started with the M5Stack, we have two different devices here. We have the M5Stack Core unit and the M5Stick C, which is the little orange guy here. And depending on which route we choose, we have slightly different steps, but essentially the main steps are the same. The first thing you want to do if you're brand new to any kind of Arduino programming is install the Arduino IDE, and then you're going to want to get the USB to serial drivers. Next step, and make sure you have the ESP32 boards manager, and then install the M5Stack library. Now this step is going to vary slightly again. If you're using the M5Stick C, you're going to want to search for M5Stick library, not stack. But again, pretty straightforward. Once you get all of those steps done, you can then go to the Arduino IDE and then go to File and Examples, and you'll have a list of examples depending on which device you're working with. In this case, we have the M5Stick C, but you can also come down here to M5Stack or M5Stick C under examples from custom libraries, and you have just a plethora of examples that you could use to test out your device. Now, I have a couple of them in my Arduino IDE pulled up here, and the first one I'm going to run is the M5Stack example. So if we take a USB-C and we plug in our M5Stack, what we are going to want to do at this point is check and see which port we have the M5Stack has picked up. We scroll up a little bit here. It looks like we're probably going to be using dev tty.slab_USB to UART. So if we configure Arduino IDE, we want to go to Tools, Port, and then select that particular port. And secondary, make sure that we select the correct board. In this case, we have the M5Stack Core. And at this point, we should be ready to upload. We have just a simple example here that's going to initialize the M5Stack object and turn on the power and then print hello world to the LCD. So if we upload that, so the program has been compiled and it is now being uploaded, and it has finished uploading to the device. And as you can see in very tiny font, which is really hard to get it to focus, we see hello world on the M5Stack. And that is essentially a very basic example of how to write to the M5Stack Core object. As I said, it's based on the ESP32 chipset, so the possibilities are endless. You can stack this with many hats. There are GPS hats, there are LoRa hats, GSM hats, all kinds of different hats and peripherals that you can get for the M5Stack as well as the M5Stick C. So definitely recommend that you check it out, especially for those who are looking to get into Arduino or any kind of microcontroller programming, but are kind of intimidated by soldering to headers and hooking up their own displays and things like that. It kind of makes it really easy to get in and learn things and kind of get a really good intro to programming with microcontroller boards. Well, that'll just about wrap it up for this week's episode of the Toddcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. Don't forget to click that subscribe button, and I will see you next time.